It's the weekend again, and it's been a bit of a slow weekend. The weather yesterday was quite fine, and I ended up working on the car most of the day. Today it's wet and a bit unpleasant, and the last couple of weeks I've been suffering. One of the downsides living in the countryside is, of course, you're surrounded by countryside and it's trying to kill me. I get really bad hay fever, and just recently it's been really, really bad. Possibly because the neighbour's field, normally she'd have cattle in there, but we haven't seen them for a little while. They're in a different field somewhere. So that's full of grass and pollen, and it's just the nature of the weather lately. It's been really bad. So I'm struggling a little bit just with the hay fever. But yesterday I was waiting for parts to arrive. My basically fuel line, copper nickel piping to do the fuel system, and I also need to do the electrical down the other side of the car. So the fuel piping arrived yesterday, but I'd come out in the morning and I decided to redo the radiator grill and redo the stone guard. This is the first one I made, which is a bit rough. I've never been that happy with it, and the main reason I didn't like it is because of this thing in the bottom. Looking at pictures of period pictures, some are like this and others are just straight across, and I prefer the straight across kind. So I had a second attempt at making one of these, basically doing it in the same way. I used copper tubing all the way around the outside and I slit it. First time I did it, I used a Dremel, which took forever. This time I thought, sod it, let's just try a slitting disc on the angle grinder, and that worked fine. You just put it in the vise, the tube, straighten it up, put it in the vise, and just slice along it, basically. You have to keep stopping and moving it along. And then I annealed all of the copper. I opened it up and basically cut out a new piece of mesh. This is stainless steel mesh. And put the copper around the outside. I did it in a single piece rather than two pieces joined together on the last one. I've made it straight across the bottom, and I just did a silver solder joint at the top, and it's come out really well. The only problem is when I did it, I wasn't careful enough with my hammering. You have to be really careful when you hammer the copper that it doesn't go all wavy because of the mesh, and I was a bit too heavy-handed. So this morning what I had to do is lift all of this up again, and I used a like a flat scraper, and I was able to get that under the edge and sort of planish the edge so it was smooth again and not all wavy. And then getting it to go around the corners is quite hard. You need a lot of shrinking and it causes a bit of distortion. So I actually went over it with solder first and built it up with solder, and that worked pretty well, but it still left little bumps and hollows. And it gets harder and harder to solder it the more solder you've got on there, because you heat it up and another piece falls off. So in the end, I've just given it a skim of epoxy. It's just JB Weld. Most of that will get sanded off and it should leave me a nice smoothish finish. That'll take 24 hours before I can sand it. You can see on the back here how the copper has hammered a bit around the wires, and you can see some of the distortion there. Obviously on the back it doesn't matter. So you can sort of see it in there as well, how the copper has sort of folded in on itself. But I think once that JB Weld dries, that can all be sanded off, and I'll probably just paint it black again. That's that satin black or semi-gloss black engine enamel. It actually sticks really well to the stainless steel. I'm quite surprised. I would have thought that would scratch off really easily, but it hasn't. It's actually bonded to it really well. So that's what I'm going to do. for the other one probably. I suppose I could, if I'm really keen, I could maybe mask off and leave it stainless, but we'll see how it goes. The actual shell, I haven't done anything to it metalwork wise, but I decided I didn't like the colour. Since I was taking all this off anyway, I stripped all the old paint off it, which took forever, and I'm going to repaint it, but with a silver paint rather than the supposed nickel coloured paint, which wasn't really nickel coloured. I was experimenting with different silvers, and I actually used my very first attempt at the grill, which is up there, and there's a bright silver paint that doesn't look too bad. It's still going to look like a painted shell, of course, but you know, that from a slight distance, if you squint, it's not that terrible, and it does have a little bit of a yellow glow to it, which the German silver does. You can see there's two original shells up there. One day I'll come back to one of those shells if I can ever get hold of the nickel silver I need to sort of make the right patch on the bottom. Maybe I could do that, but I think that'll look a lot better. Now for the fuel and the main battery cable, I've kind of figured out where I'm going to run those. I need to take the body off again. You can see the main battery cable down behind under there, and I'm going to use one of the body mounting bolts to sort of see it there, to hold the earth cable. I may turn the battery round, I'm not sure, that probably works fine, keeps the earth strap out of the way. And I forgot what I was going to say, but that's right. So the cable will go up under the seat there and run up along the side of the inside of the chassis rail. And what I'm going to do is mount it using these rubber P clamps on the inside. This is actually for the fuel line, which will run up this side. I have bigger rubber lined clamps for the battery cable, and I'm trying to work out if I am going to put the sort of side skirt on the car, and I think I will, because what that allows me to do, these seem to vary. Again, I've been looking at period pictures. There aren't really a lot of factory pictures of these cars. There's a brochure, but it looks like it's all been touched up, so it's hard to really see what they look like. But there are lots of pictures of cars racing in period at Brooklands, and they're all different. It's hard to tell if they were different from the factory or they've been modified. But there is an original car, 8017, I think, a white car that does still have these covers on the side, and there must be some sort of standoff. They're bolted to the side through here, quite a few bolts. The number of bolts seems to vary. For me, I have to have the fuel line clipped at least every 12 inches, but the bolts are spaced way closer than that. This was me just playing with some spacing. I think that's 9 inches. So one there, one there, one there, and one along there. 4 bolts matches one of the period cars. So I'm just playing with that now, and what I'm going to do is drill the holes, and I'll have to probably drill a hole through this cross member either side, so that the cable or the hose, the fuel line can actually go through that cross member. I don't really want to bring it up over the top. That looks a little bit messy. And obviously the fuel line will come up here. There is room under there, come up, and there'll probably be a like an expansion loop in here, although I think really they need to go horizontal, so might just be able to fit it in there to join onto that. And on the other side, the the main battery cable comes up and joins onto the starter solenoid here, and I have another earth strap, so I'm going to earth the engine to the chassis up here as well to make sure the starter is really well earthed. That's kind of where I'm at. In order to do that, I need to take the body off once again. It is just kind of sitting there, but this is a good chance for me to practice taking the bulkhead off, the firewall bulkhead off, and making sure the body actually lifts off by itself, which I think it will. The other thing is I have ordered the steel, and apparently it's arrived, steel and aluminium. So from a local engineering firm, actually owned by the chap we bought the house from. So this was originally his shed. He never used it. It was just finished when we moved in. It was the last thing we were waiting for, was the code of compliance on this. But he owns an engineering firm, so I asked him if he was able to get the steel and the aluminium in for me, because it's a lot easier for a company to deal with that than me as a private individual having to arrange shipping and all that kind of business. So hopefully I'll be able to get that off him soon. I've got aluminium for the under tray. Somebody did mention they thought that those side covers are part of the under tray. I don't think they are. I think they're separate. And one of the things with those side covers is that they, on some cars, it comes all the way up to here and comes across straight, which gives you that bottom half of the bonnet. Bottom half, the side panels under the bonnet, I guess it would be. So it actually comes up here and comes across, and that's what the bonnet comes down to, and that gives you a place to put the bonnet latch. You can also do it straight to the chassis, of course. And then over here, there's a triangular piece that comes in, flat piece, oops, if we can see, that bolts straight to the top of here and has a flange on it, and that's the lower part of that bonnet mount. So it's coming together, as well as the aluminium for the under tray. There's sheets of 1mm for the body and some 1.2 for me to make the petrol tank. And I think it's just started raining again. My nose has started running again from the hay fever. That's kind of where I'm at. Not too much progress this week. One thing worth mentioning with this stone guard is you have to make the holes quite big in the little tabs, because effectively I'm using bolts from the inside and they stick out like studs, but this isn't flat. So the studs stick out at angles. So to get the stone guard on, the holes need to be bigger, if that makes sense. And on the previous one, I'd used little rubber grommets to stand it off the grill. For this one, I've made up some little brass spacers, and I also made little brass pieces that go on top of the tabs, because I got the tabs a bit too close, or I made the guard a little bit too big. So there isn't much space around these tabs. So I had to make these to sit on top of there, and the little dome bolts go on top of that. But that'll hold it all nice and securely. And to make these, I actually used those in there. I was actually able to use for the first time the new DRO setup on the lathe. One of the things I did to make these easier to read is tipped that panel back. You can probably see there's an angle on it, and it worked really well. So I'm pleased that that's all working now. I was able to machine up those little brass spacers and then just mill the flats on the milling machine. I made a mistake when I first did that. I cut or machined up a long piece and thought I'll mill the flat and then I'll trim all the little pieces off and then face them off, and then realized with a three-jaw chuck, I had no way of holding them because they now had a big flat on one side. So I had to redo it, make them circular, and then individually mill them down in the mill, which is probably the sensible way to do it anyway, because you can set up like a stop and guide so they're all the same, even if you're doing them one at a time. So yeah, I'm pleased with how that's come out. Somebody did mention cable management last time, and I will look at that a bit better in future, but for now there's a little bit of Velcro holding them up out of the way. That seems to work fine. The cable's pretty tough, it's insulated, so I think that'll be all right for now. As I say, the weather's not very good today. It's really hard to get motivated. I have been using this ACF 50 that Mr. Tweed recommended, and it works very well. So I keep that in that container, and I've got a dedicated rag that I use, which is turning into quite the oily rag, but it's oily with this corrosion inhibiting stuff. So that works quite well for wiping down the tools and the lathe and the mill, hammers and dollies, that kind of thing. Seems to be working quite well. Yeah, like I say, it's really hard to get motivated today. One thing I do need to do is I'd quite like to get a nice aluminium eared fuel cap spinner thing to go on this. I'm going to have to, because I'm making my own tank, I can make whatever filler tube I need, and it'd be nice to get a nice filler cap for it with the dog bone type ears. I do have a picture of one somewhere, but maybe what I should do is resurrect my casting stuff. So there's my little furnace. It's just a charcoal powered furnace, and I use an old hair dryer to force air into it. Obviously that moved with me from my last house, but I haven't fired it up, and we've been here almost 3 years now, so I should probably get back into that. I think I need to make a new steel crucible. The last one, every time you use them, of course, a little bit of them disappears because of the heat, and they just rust away. So I need to make a new one of those, I think. But maybe this would be a good thing for me to try casting up. Not sure. The other thing I haven't decided yet, or haven't figured out exactly how it should be done, is if the fuel pickups should be in the top with tubes running down, or from underneath. I'm pretty sure the SU pump can suck the fuel up and along. I think. I'm not really sure on that. But there is room, once the under tray goes in here, there is space there, but I may need to use some little right angle sort of bends, because of course what I want to do is have two pickup tubes, so I can have one slightly off the bottom, so I can have a main and a reserve, because there's no fuel gauge in this car. So it seems like a sensible way to do it. Because I'm feeling totally unmotivated working on the car today, and the weather's bad, my hay fever's bad. I'm just actually sitting in my lab watching YouTube videos. But I did fire up an old project which one day I really have to finish, which is a little cloud chamber for showing radiation or radioactive particles. So I think this was one of my lockdown projects. It uses Peltier electronic coolers. You can sort of see there's a stack of them under there. This is a PC CPU cooling fan with heat pipes, and then there's just sort of a bell and some insulation, LED lights to provide a bit of backlighting, and there's a 3D printed ring here with some brass mesh and a piece of felt between them, which you soak with isopropyl alcohol any sort of alcohol will work, probably methylated spirits would work as well. And I have a little high voltage power supply here that electrifies the grid, which helps, and it's all running off an old PC power supply. It's a real lash up at the moment. You can see my LEDs have all moved, but basically what happens is this mechanism cools this plate. This is an aluminium plate painted black, and it chills it right down. I can't remember what the temperature is, it's pretty low, but the alcohol vapor comes down, sort of floods this plate, and the radioactive particles, as they shoot through, cause condensation trails. It's a bit like aircraft at high altitude causing the condensation trails behind them. This is the same thing, it's just the particles doing it as they move through this alcohol vapor. And what it does when it's working is it shows you the trails of the radioactive particles. So because I've taken the top off, I need to let it chill down again, but I'll see if I can film the particles. My radioactive source, by the way, that little metal button, is out of a ionization smoke detector, and that's the radioactive source they use in them is it's a byproduct from nuclear reactors, basically. There's only a tiny amount there. These are pretty safe. If you swallowed one, maybe you would get sick eventually, but as long as you're careful handling these things and storing them, they're not that dangerous. I have this lead storage container here that I keep things in, which is more than enough to stop alpha particles. I'll let it chill down and see if I can film some of the trails. So this should hopefully show, there we go, the alpha particles being flung off. So the radioactive source is americium-241. I had to go and look that up. I knew what it was called, I couldn't remember the number. I can never remember the number. But you can see the little trails made by the alpha particles whizzing off. Every so often with this cloud chamber you will see another trail, and that's actually cosmic radiation passing through it, which is kind of cool to see. So what you do is you take the source out, and every so often you will see another trail just at random. But this one you can see probably that any of these particles shooting off are coming from that source. It's a cool little gadget. I first tried to make one of these when I was in high school, I think, but we didn't really have the Peltier coolers back then. Well, we did, because I did one of those for a science project as well, but back in the day you used to use dry ice, and because my father worked at the medical school I was able to get dry ice from time to time, but I never actually got that one to work. I still have it somewhere. I have the thing I made. I do remember at the time, this is sort of 35-40 years ago, my biggest problem was painting the aluminium. Right back then is when I discovered paint doesn't stick to aluminium unless you use the right sort of etch primers and things like that. But yeah, this one's working reasonably well at the moment. Like I say, I think this was one of my lockdown projects. I really need to build this into a proper box, proper sort of housing. It's good to see it still works. I haven't fired it up for a while, but yeah, it's working pretty well.